Okay, Maayan, we're live. Thanks again for joining me this afternoon. I'm going to give the floor to you. I know I reached out to you on LinkedIn, and I'm really curious how you were able to build such a robust following online, specifically through TikTok. I was checking out your TikTok. I think you're sitting at 2.3 million followers on TikTok. How did that come to be?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, it really came to be. I think this is probably the truth of any human story over many, many years, right? So it wasn't something that happened in a silo overnight. Even though I would say for TikTok specifically, I did have kind of the trigger of that audience growth was a viral video that literally happened overnight, and I woke up to the next morning. But
Mm.
preceding me being on TikTok, I was on Instagram for 8 years with three different businesses. I basically used the exact same Instagram account, and each time I started a new business, I just went, "Hey everyone, so we're going this direction now. Here's the reason and the story behind why we're making this pivot." To some of you, this may no longer be a relevant channel. To others of you, welcome along the journey that is driven by me, Maayan. So how I grew that audience, I would say the number one thing was just grit and perseverance and stick to itiveness of saying, this is something I want to contribute effort and time into, and not with the primary outcome being the result that I got. So I think, in any business endeavor, what we really want is a byproduct and an outcome of a different centered motivation. So your motivation for something can be very, very different than the outcome you're actually trying to achieve. And I found that for me, that's the most effective way to navigate social media. And to put that in different words, I don't like making social media content. I don't know really anyone who, that's not true. I know some very small amount of creators who really, really are passionate about creating creative pieces of content. I think for most entrepreneurs and business owners, producing content is something we see as a necessary evil or something that we should be doing or something that even if we do enjoy, we don't understand how to map or integrate the part of it that we enjoy into the context that produces business results. And so for me, it was really that integration that allowed me to be successful on the social media side because honestly, I have very little motivation intrinsically for wanting to grow a huge audience. I think very few of us, that's our real goal. Our real goal might be more time freedom to spend with our family. It might be connecting with other human beings on a deeper, more authentic level. So I think it's really figuring out what motivates you intrinsically to do the behavior in a way that's hyper consistent and just hyper, I would say, volume centric, while at the same time be motivated to have a high level of quality, or at least be able to increase your level of quality. So any of us who start anything usually start at the level of suck, right? Like we're not good at it.
Mhm.
And it takes a pretty high level of repetition before we get into the somewhat good range and then hopefully into right at some point the mastery level. And you can't really skip into mastery level without a massive amount of repetition, even if you have extraordinary talent. Extraordinary talent still requires a huge amount of repetition. And so for me, how I achieved success at social media was by realizing it's a real skill that unless you have mastery level talent, you're not going to be achieving results generally of consistent, viral content, of consistent content that produces a desired outcome. So to motivate myself to get that level of repetition, it had to not be about the outcome because I'm actually not motivated by that outcome. I don't get super excited for a long duration of time at the idea of having a million followers. So what
Mhm.
does motivate me to produce that level of consistency and at the same time want to increase my quality of content is really being able to deliver some type of emotional value to other people who are struggling in probably similar capacities that I used to be struggling in. Right? So thinking about, okay, what are the incredibly challenging human hard things that I've been through in my life? Well, guess what? I know there's millions of other people who are going through those same things. How can I speak to and provide value around that in a way that relates to my business? And that's what I want to drive business for me. One, because it's embedded upon a fundamental human value creation that isn't tied to a business outcome. Secondly, I believe all human outcomes lead to business outcomes. So instead of thinking about a business as a vehicle that drives human behavior, I think about human behavior as being a vehicle that drives business. So I looked at it a little bit in reverse for me to be effective.
And how did you get to that point, or can you maybe speak to the intrinsic motivation? I imagine that wasn't there when you first started. How did that click for you?
Yeah, so I mean that's a long road and journey of I think first being in a space of unaware as to how I guess unfulfilled I was in life, how envious I was of other things and other people that I didn't perceive as having those, qualities or those literal things in my life, to then a place of aware that a lot of my behavior and communications were driven by these external factors that I'd kind of diminished my awareness to. Then once I was aware of them, working on the internal construction of my world and having the external business world be a mirror or a reflection for the work I was doing internally. So I know that might have sounded a little bit convoluted. But for me, how I got there was really realizing that our business is a map or a reflection of ourselves as people. And how I got there would be a whole different, longer story. But basically, I realized everything in our job life, in our business life, in our life that isn't completely internal was a pure reflection or a pure correlation to the internal world that we were experiencing. And when I started out, my internal world, to be honest, it was not great. In fact, it wasn't good either. It was I would say highly miserable place in a not a judgmental way, but just in an honest, transparent way. Like I wasn't happy or fulfilled or comfortable internally most of the time in my youth and teenage years, and even when I was in college before I dropped out. And it was the coming to realization that that was my reality and an acceptance of it, and then a willingness to go in a different direction. So to kind of answer in a more succinct way your question, a ton of trial and error where I had clearly identified what error was. And I think one of the really challenging things that people, or one of the big challenges that people who are navigating social media are having, is they don't have a clear definition of success and failure from an internal calibration standpoint. They're only using external metrics. And external metrics are not things that any of us control. How many likes, how many followers, how many comments, how many inbound messages you get from a post, you don't control that. You only control your input. So you can control the words you're using in your post. You can create and control how a post feels for you to create. And I've just noticed such a correlation between how things feel internally and their outcome results that I can hyper focus on the internal part of the creation of it with a detachment from the outcome in a way that actually produces better outcome than if I focused on the outcome specifically.
Yeah, it's kind of almost a paradox, right?
Yes.
I don't know if you
Yes.
relate to that. I mean, I don't know. There's a
A
lot of those in
billion,
life,
I
I
think
think.
human beings are fundamental paradoxes in every
Yeah.
single way.
Yeah, because it's interesting, right? I mentioned before we started recording, I started this in July, and obviously I've consumed a lot of social media content or a lot of content on YouTube, and then you actually go into producing it, and it's a chore, for lack of a better word. It's a job, right? And I don't
Yeah.
think people realize that. So I guess maybe what I'm getting at, it sounds like you crush people's expectations a lot, because, when I ask you, like, how do you get 2.3 million followers, and you don't say, oh, this is the secret and that's it. This is how you do a viral video and that's it. And you're done. This is going to be a lot of work. You need to have the right motivation. You need to stick with it for years, right? You said you did it for 8 years. So does that happen a lot? And maybe with individuals, family, friends, and business owners, is that kind of your biggest role when you first meet with someone, is kind of laying that out?
Yeah, I would say, it really depends on I guess, the worldview and the place in the journey that anyone's at when I'm talking to them. But yes, I would say, I turn away like 90+% of business that comes my way simply because they have the completely wrong viewpoint or mental framework for what they're trying to achieve. And I would say that is, um, easy to identify by the question someone's asking. So I think for the most part, human beings in general are asking the wrong questions. And if you're not asking the right questions, the answers you're getting have no real value to the thing you really want to achieve. So if what you really want to achieve, and I believe this is true for all human beings, is a deeply meaningful life, but the question you're asking is, how do I have a more comfortable life? Or how do I have a life with more perceived control and perceived freedom, which is a whole different topic we could talk on as to whether or not we really have free will, right? Or whether that's a perception our brain creates. So that's a different conversation. But those are the things we really care about as people, not how many followers, not how much money we make. We use those as tools to help ourselves reflect upon the deeper question, which is a really challenging question, which is, how do I make my life meaningful? And that's really the only thing any of us care about. And so when people come to me and they're like, hey, Maayan, how do we gain, 2 million followers on TikTok? The first kind of process of me asking questions back at to them all centers around, what do you really want? I know that that's not the end goal. Like, why do you want 1 million followers? Oh, because we think that'll help us generate more sales. Why do you want more sales? There's such a deep ingrained why that each of us have that is, I would say, in the category of a worldview that we want to be our reality, our personal reality and our shared reality. But we don't get to speak to because there aren't societal kind of niceties or frameworks for how we talk about existential matters, right? Like when we meet each other as strangers in a conversation, we go, hey, how's it going? We don't go, hey, so what's your worldview? Or what is human to you? Or we don't go straight to deep questions because our society just doesn't have a framework for that being part of our social kind of back and forth and normal process. But that's the world I live in. And the world I live in is just filled with deep meaning. And every person that I come in contact to, I want to go there. I don't want to talk about, I will talk about the weather in a fun way if we need to kind of bridge a gap between normalcy and the place I live in, which I would say is highly not normal. Although I would also say normalcy is a complete fallacy we created and doesn't really exist. But yes, to kind of answer your question, I think if people, most of the work I do is to get people to change their perspective more than it is to learn a tactic. Because guess what? The internet's filled with all the tactics you could ever ask. You could go to ChatGPT and ask it literally any question, and it'll have a really, really useful answer based on the question that you're asking. What I want to get people to do is ask much better questions.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that why. One point I want to bring up, I believe, so Alex Hormozy basically says something along the lines of like, you are the brand, right? So if you think about what he talks about, and I would imagine it's the same, or what Joe Rogan talks about, they talk about their interests, which I think makes it, you don't need that external motivation to keep going. You just do it because you want to talk about it anyways. And in turn, that attracts the audience that shares those interests and allows you to grow and to have a long-term view. I don't know if you resonate with that at all, or if that's advice you provide as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things I often think about is the kind of confluence point between what we're passionate about and what we have talent towards. And this is true from, a physical level, if you play like an instrument, which instrument you're interested to play versus which instrument you would be the most talented at. And I think the same thing's true of everything, right? Whether that's which type of business are you creating paired with which type of business. So I guess, which type of business do you feel the most passionate to create? Cross-referenced with which businesses would you have the most talent at naturally being successful with. And if you can find the point on the map or on the graph where you have a high level of talent or of innate ability that crosses with a high level of, I would call it curiosity more than interest, because I think we can get shiny object syndrome, especially in today's world. It's very, very easy. And so saying I'm interested in something isn't quite the same as saying I'm curious about something. To me, curiosity is something that has more longevity than just
Hmm.
pure interest. Because interest, I might have a huge spike of interest that diminishes to zero, actually relatively quickly. I think a classic example of this are when we're children and we get a toy. When we're below a certain age, we might have 100,000% interest in that toy for like 2 weeks straight, and then it goes to zero and we like throw the toy away and never want to look at it again. And so, really being able to be self-aware around, is this something I'm momentarily interested in, or is this something that piques my permanent level of curiosity? And then finding out where that curiosity within us lies. Because I think people do have natural different tendencies to be curious around different subject matters or curious around things with a different kind of framework. And so figuring out, where is your curiosity? Not just where's your interest, but where's the thing you're going to keep asking yourself questions about that subject matter? That's where you'll never run out of energy, of passion, of all the things that, in my opinion, fuel business activity.
So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's maybe this is just kind of how it is, but that seems kind of messy to me. I mean, how do you advise people to do that? Like, how do you, maybe myself, say, okay, how do I differentiate between a curiosity and an interest?
I think that's a really good question. I don't know that I have something, that I've shared off the top of my head kind of packaged as a response. I would say though, one, it is messy. Um, just in general, I think being a human being is a really messy thing. And I don't quite know where we all got this notion to try and make it neat and pretty and unmessy, but it's clear that I would imagine it comes from an efficiency standpoint, that messiness can be perceived as inefficiency in a way. In a different perspective, though, I think uh, messiness leads to leaps in efficiency that neatness will never lend to. So it's kind of I would say in the business world, there's an analogous scenario between investing in um, what would you call it, like a blue stock chip versus the
Hmm.
startup world, right? So
Hmm.
blue stock chips, or businesses that are highly established, really large, have incredible track record, might be safer and more organized to invest in, but are less likely to have these you know huge leaps in revenue, in changing culture, in innovation, right? Is kind of how we
Hmm.
sum that up. And so I think asking yourself, what is your primary psychological driver, will help you kind of navigate that question around curiosity versus interest. So I think there's only a couple prime intrinsic motivators at the deepest level of human psychology. One is for sure safety. Um, Safety is something that we all seek. And I think safety is often kind of balanced against, or I would say actually in harmony, not necessarily balanced, but in harmony with novelty. So, novelty meaning anything that's new. Now, new things are inherently less safe than known things. But some people are more motivated by the upside of novelty than they are mitigated by the downside of risk. And so, really, I think, understanding curiosity versus interest is on the same kind of correlation between understanding for yourself your balance, or your, again, kind of harmony between risk and safety, and
Hmm.
just how you even conceptualize those two concepts. Because if you look at life very, very objectively and strip down away a lot of our constructs, life is the least safe thing you can engage with. It's the only, you have to be alive to be able to die. It's way less risky to not even be alive than it is to be alive in the context of death, right? And then if you think about any of the things that make us feel unsafe, there's physical safety, then there's our psychological safety, there's social safety, there's emotional, there's all these different layers to something that um, is real in one sense, is completely unreal in another sense. And I think that really describes what it means to be human. Is human beings are clearly this real thing. We all feel human, we all engage with other humans, but human being is also completely fictitious when you think about the physical objective reality being that we're Homo sapiens. So what is this human being part of it? And so I think all of these questions revolve around self-awareness. And I think self-awareness is really something we self-define more than something we discover. And again, these are all words and concepts that to me are very fluid and bleed into each other, which is what makes it so messy. There
Hmm.
aren't hard defined lines in our world, not even between life and death, right? Like if you look at is a virus alive? If you look at any boundary that the human mind has created, there are a whole wealth of questions and really good examples as to, well, is that line even really there? And how do we define where the line is? And so I think when it comes, bringing this all kind of back full circle, when it comes to answering questions about social media and growing a following and building your business, it's how do you define each of those terms? And where is the line that you are placing between any of these different concepts that aren't physically real?
And you think someone should take that step before they even begin posting or creating an account, or is it more trial and error? Like keep
I
those
think
things
you
in
can do them
mind.
in parallel. I think, again, this idea that our business activities are siloed off from our personal experience. Like we are ourselves in every instance of our day and in every instance of our life. And so I think going into the activity part when you don't have a wealth of data or you don't have a wealth of experience, you're a startup or you're trying something new that you've never tried before, you have to experiment. You can't look at that activity as something that can be predetermined. It's just, I think that's a complete false reality that unfortunately the business and mostly the marketing world has perpetuated. Marketers love to go, we've gotten these results for our clients, therefore we will get these results for you. Well, unfortunately, that's not how the world or science works. And I would say, business activity and social media and marketing are not sciences in the same way that like chemistry and even though we'll use science as a word to kind of play in that realm, we can do scientific behaviors and create scientific processes. But marketing is not science. It's much more akin to art and intuition than it is something where there are core fundamental principles that we can rely on. And a lot of that is because marketing is heavily influenced by one, culture, which changes all the time. Culture is not a static thing. And two, by the medium through which media is consumed by. So when I say medium, I mean the internet or a billboard or in-person word of mouth. That's the medium. And when you have core, you can't do science without core principles that are static and fixed. Having core principles that are fluctuation, now we're talking like quantum mechanics, which is something we don't understand. We like to pretend we understand it, but like almost not at all do we understand properties of things that are probabilistic. And again, this sounds very messy and maybe convoluted, but the core message I have for people is you can't predict what's going to happen. No matter how much the world or people or business is telling you with these factors, you can predict. With these factors, maybe you have a 30% chance accuracy of prediction or a 60% chance. There is no 100% chance. I think there's rarely anything above an 80% chance of your prediction ever being correct in the world that we live in today. And so then it's different questions, right? What do I care about? Do I care about security and safety? Then how do I do social media activities and efforts that produce a higher level of safety? Maybe not, maybe that's not sales or measure, maybe it's not exclusively measured by sales. But I think really attacking things from that question of what do I as a human being want and need? And then how can I establish my core activities to have a incremental, consistent increase in that thing that I really care about? That's something we really do have control over. Saying one specific outcome is something we really don't have control over.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And maybe if you're willing to share, we can kind of close out with, because you've talked about it a lot, meaning you have a lot of years behind you, a lot of trial and error. And so I'm just curious what you care about and kind of how that's shifted over time and how it affects your approach today from a business standpoint and a social media standpoint.
Yeah. And again, what a question that has complicated, I would say, factors or context around it. So for me, I would say when I started out in business, my primary motivator was an internal sense of freedom, meaning did I feel like I was choosing the work that I was doing? Right now, again, in an objective context, we're all choosing the work that we're doing. We're choosing to go to that school. We're choosing to go to that job. We're choosing to continue to run our own business. But how we feel about the work we're doing, sometimes we feel trapped or forced. And so my first ever motivation in my entrepreneurial journey was to just figure out how to feel like I was choosing the work that I was doing and not being forced to do it. So then kind of once I got to that place, my next kind of journey was, okay, how do I, from this psychological, mental standpoint, create enough financial support so that I've got a roof over my head and food that I can eat in a literal sense, not in a, do I think next month I'll have enough, but right now, today, do I have enough money to buy food? Right now, today, do I have somewhere safe and temperature controlled to sleep in? Once I got to that level, and honestly, that one for me was years, because I built my first business when I was homeless. Me and my husband were living out of like a broken down RV. So like in the summer in Los Angeles, we couldn't be inside the RV because we had 2 dogs and it would get too hot to be inside a vehicle without any, air conditioning. So very different way of navigating, very different decisions around my business activities, where like we would go to McDonald's early in the morning when it was still cool and we could leave our dogs in the car, and we would get we'd buy a coffee because that's all we had money for, and we'd sit in McDonald's on my laptop for like 4 hours till either they kicked us out or we felt like it was about time to leave, because our kind of primary motivator was, can we make some type of progress to get into a better living situation, while at the same time not letting go of the sense of control and freedom that we had in the work that we were doing. Once we were able to figure that out and go, okay, now we're operating from a place where I feel like I'm choosing the work that I'm doing and it's making enough money to cover my basic physical needs. Now, how do I make myself feel like I have hope and runway for the future? So I think we go through all these different stages as we're developing, both personally and in our businesses. And again, when you're in your early 20s, how you think about risk, very different than when you have, let's say, a child in your mid 30s, right? And so it was kind of this evolution of both, I think, a journey of self-actualization, or whatever you want to call it, Maslow's different, hierarchy. There's lots and lots of different models for the journey that human beings go on. While at the same time, I think there's a practical, evolution of business building, right? From, I don't know anything about what I'm doing and I don't want to do this, and I know I like doing this. So navigating, okay, how do I center my work activities around something I feel excitement or passion for or meaning for? Okay, now how do I use that place and figure out how to make money from it? Okay, now that I'm making money from it, how do I create some type of psychological stability in the future, right? Because once you're making enough money for right now, then you go, okay, well, I've got bills coming next month. Okay, well, what about if my car breaks? Okay, well, what about, and you start envisioning all these future scenarios of things that might happen. And so then you try and create activities that provide safety infrastructure to mitigate or prevent future worries. And then a really interesting thing happened as I started going deeper and deeper into a space of asking myself what really it was to be human and what made our lives meaningful. I started kind of detaching from a need for future psychological safety, because I realized that, one, it wasn't real in the moment. Two, what I thought would create safety was often incorrect. And so if I'm creating worry about a future scenario because I know that pressure from the future will change my actions and behaviors right now in a way that I believe is positive, but then I find out that the actions I took because of that pressure actually didn't make things better, then you start realizing that you're wasting your energy changing your now behavior based on a future you're trying to mitigate in a way that you don't have enough data to actually mitigate it against. allowed me to dive much more deeply into just being present. I would say, and it got into, I would say, very much like the spiritual context of, like I grew up Orthodox Jewish, but I would say I'm deeply Buddhist in practice, because the things we can control are only right in this now moment. And it just so happens, from my experience going further down this rabbit hole, the more you can put your energy towards the present and just really putting your effort and intention and action into right now, the future works itself out, and you don't have to really think about it or worry about it as much as when you're thinking about the future, because now you're not being present. So again, it's one of those paradoxes where we want now to be better because the future doesn't exist ever. We never reach the future. We only live in right now. But we do this thing where we think we can make now better by doing things for the future, by paying attention to the future. And actually, if we not forget about the future, but make well-informed decisions, taking into account future possibilities, but purely focused on the now moment in our activity, it's almost like you break into a totally different reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one thing I thought, do you think that that's a similar path for a lot of people, or at least entrepreneurs, where at first you're just saying, hey, I need my basic needs met. And then maybe not exactly like yours, but then it's a pivot to how can I make the most of my time while I'm here, kind of thing. You start out with an X down the path of, hey, this is where all this money is going to be and it's going to solve all my problems. And then you start going down the path and you realize that that's not the case. I don't know. I don't know if you resonate. I think people have their unique experiences, but it follows a similar path for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I think you're super accurate. In the way I kind of visualize it is, there's certain points along the path, but they're non-linear, and we don't always hit the points in the same sequence or order. And sometimes people skip certain points entirely, like, which is freaking awesome if you get to skip one of the, I would say more painful or, suffering centric kind of points that kind of positions you or pivots you in a direction. Some people just leap one of those spots and never really even have to experience it. And vice versa. Some people, I think, have to experience more points of, again, suffering or challenge or hardship, or whatever ways you want to think about those different things that really make us reflect and change our behavior or change our perspective on the world. But yes, I have never met a happy human who didn't get there through some type of journey that had similar shared points to something that every human being goes through at some point.
Yeah, no, I like it. And I always love having these conversations because I see your profile on LinkedIn and kind of your presence online, but you don't know how that's going to come across in a conversation. So I always find that super interesting. But to close us out here, we've touched on it a bit, but someone out there that's listening that says, okay, hey, I want to be a content creator. I want to create a TikTok account. What is one actionable item that they can take today? The first thing you recommend, right? And I think you're going to say, hey, it's not just try and go viral and try and get as many followers as you can, but maybe if you could kind of put it in an actionable form, what should they do today? The first step.
Yeah, oof, that's, it's hard to give anything generalized to people, because
Okay.
really, like, one of the things, I think context makes a huge difference. But to answer your question, I would say something practical and actionable that anyone could do that will guaranteed make all of their efforts better, not just on content, but in general, is write out whatever it is you're trying to do, the activity and the goal, in a game format. So just literally on a piece of paper or on your phone. So let's say your goal is to grow your business to $500,000 in revenue in 2024. So you would start by saying, to win the game, me, player one, has to generate $500,000 worth of revenue in 2024. And then you start writing out, okay, what are the rules of the game and what are the different actions that any player can take? And if you can write out what you're trying to do as a game, one, it immediately feels more fun. It's wild how you can take something that, when you think about the tasks, right, the to-do list, and you list them in your head and you have this feeling of like, ugh, I don't want to do that. And if you literally just rewrite those same tasks in a game format, your internal compass will go, ooh, can't wait to do this part of it. It's super crazy how gaming impacts us. So doing that, and then figuring out, are there games within the game that you can create and play around those specific activities. So again, let's say the big game you're playing is to be a player who wants to win by generating $500,000 in revenue in 2024. One of the mini games you're playing within your game is creating social media content. Okay, well, how are you going to make that into its own game? Right? So then you might say, okay, well, to win the social media game, I want to have 10 people leave meaningful comments on my posts each week or each month, or right? You start with kind of one winning metric, and you say, okay, to win this game, here's a different parameter. And then you play each game individually, knowing that they contribute to the larger game's outcome. I think trying to go directly to, I want to make $500,000. How do I do that? Without gamifying the individual components makes it feel, one, not fun. Two, I think mitigates a lot of the creativity that allows us to be successful. So I think in any business, what is going to make, especially in today's world, what's going to make you successful are little creative connections. Just simple ideas, not complex. Oh, I should message this type of person in this type of format. Or, oh, I should create this style of content or content with this particular message that speaks to this particular type of person. Not because that by itself is going to generate finances, but because that by itself generates a win in this micro game that I've created. And I know if I win these 3 games, I'm by byproduct going to win the larger game that I've created.
No, I like it a lot. So I think that's a great way to end. And one thing it made me think of is that we as humans think in absolutes, right? So if you think, I'm here today and I want $500,000, I'm looking for one thing that I could do to get there, and that thing doesn't exist. And so you're done before you start. So again, hey, I appreciate you taking the time. I learned a lot. I hope it'll be useful when I put it out there on social media, but I'll close by giving you the floor. Any final thoughts? Where can people find you? Anything you'd like?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me on as a guest. Anyone who wants to connect with me, LinkedIn's probably the best place. Luckily, I've got a tricky, challenging name, so if you just type in, Maayan Gordon, I should be the first one that pops up. And I would just say, my last kind of just closing message is, again, just to reiterate what we've been talking about, but in more simple terms, just make your day-to-day fun. Make it so that you want to be doing and you have intrinsic motivation to do the work that you're doing, and you're going to be successful. Our ability to create success, I believe, is 100% correlated on our motivation and the energy we're putting into the work that we're doing. And then, I would guess the last thing is talk with people about it. Talk with people about the things that you're excited and passionate about, even if you can't see a direct outcome that's business related. I think a lot of business success is emergence, not determinism. And to explain what that means, I think most of the success that we see in the world was not someone creating a plan in their head and going and doing just that. I think it was someone creating an environment in which success emerged independently of their own design. So how can you make your, day-to-day fruitful? Or how can you think about yourself as nutrients in creating a soil that the plant of your business or the plant or, seed of your success will bloom into? That's a much better way to think about it than how can I design the right seed? We don't control the seeds. What we do control is the soil that the seeds are put into.
I think that's a great closing thought. And so, so you can hopefully grow your network. Your LinkedIn will be in the description of this episode. So again, hey, thanks for the time. And yeah, you have my contact info as well. So if you ever want to reach out, I'm always available.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and have an amazing rest of your day.
Yeah.